Today, Curtis "50 Cent" Jackson commands an empire worth over $40 million. His name echoes through hip-hop history. His business ventures span entertainment, alcohol, and technology. But behind this towering success lies a darker tale most fans have never heard. The name 50 Cent wasn't created in a marketing meeting or dreamed up in a recording studio. It was borrowed, stolen, some might say, from a legendary Brooklyn criminal whose shadow still looms over New York streets decades after his death. When In Da Club exploded onto radio stations worldwide in 2003, few realized they were witnessing the rebirth of a name that once struck fear throughout Brooklyn's toughest neighborhoods. The catchy hooks and street narratives that propelled Curtis Jackson to global fame carried with them an invisible weight. The legacy of another man who never lived to see his 30s. The empire 50 Cent built extends far beyond music. His savvy investment in vitamin water alone reportedly netted him between $60 and $100 million when Coca-Cola acquired the company. His G-Unit clothing line dominated urban fashion for years. His Effin' Vodka partnership, television production, company and headphone ventures have cemented his status as a business mogul. From his executive producer role on Power to his recent television projects, Curtis Jackson transformed himself from a street hustler to an entertainment executive whose decisions affect billions in revenue. This remarkable journey from the dangerous streets of South Jamaica, Queens to boardrooms and red carpets seems almost miraculous when you consider how it began. Raised without a father, orphaned at 8 when his mother was murdered, dealing crack by 12, Curtis Jackson's life wasn't supposed to end in mansions and private jets. It was supposed to end like so many others from his neighborhood, in prison or an early grave. Perhaps that's why the name he chose carries such significance. In a world where authenticity means everything, Curtis needed more than talent. He needed a story, a connection to the streets that couldn't be questioned. And in the whispered legends of a Brooklyn stick-up kid, he found exactly what he was looking for. The true origin of the 50 Cent name remains somewhat mysterious, even to dedicated fans. In interviews, Curtis has offered variations of the story, sometimes downplaying the connection, other times embracing it. But the truth is more chilling than any verse on Get Rich or Die Tryin'. It's the story of how a dead man's reputation became the foundation for one of hip-hop's greatest success stories. And it all began in the Brooklyn projects, where a small-time hustler named Curtis Jackson first heard whispers about a legendary robber whose name commanded respect even a decade after his death. A man known simply as 50 Cent, the original 50 Cent, whose bloody legacy would provide the perfect blueprint for a hungry young rapper looking to make his mark on the world. The South Jamaica houses in Queens during the 1980s and early 90s was no place for a child. For young Curtis Jackson, it became a brutal classroom after his mother's murder. Edaf Owens, just 23 years old, had been drugged and then gassed in her own apartment, reportedly by drug dealers she'd crossed. At 8 years old, Curtis moved in with his grandparents, but the streets were already calling him. By 12, he was slinging crack on corners, earning money that no child should have. I was selling drugs in the daytime and going to school at the same time, 50 has admitted in interviews. The crack epidemic had transformed New York's poorest neighborhoods into war zones, and survival meant creating a reputation that commanded respect. In this environment, a name could mean everything, the difference between being predator or prey. Curtis was smart and observant. He watched how respect worked on the streets, how certain names carried weight, how reputations were built and destroyed. He wasn't physically imposing, much like the man whose name he would eventually adopt, but he understood the power of perception, the currency of fear. He needed an identity that would give him an edge in a game where the stakes were literally life and death. It was around this time, in the early 1990s, that Curtis first heard whispers about the original 50 Cent. The name came up in conversations between older hustlers, spoken with a mixture of awe and fear. "There was this dude from Fort Greene who used to rob everybody," one neighborhood veteran told Curtis. "They called him 50 Cent because that's all it took for him to put your life on the line. He didn't care if you had $5 or 5,000. If he decided to rob you, you were getting robbed." These stories fascinated young Curtis. In the original 50 Cent, he saw a figure who had transcended ordinary criminal status to become something like an urban legend. Even though Kelvin Martin, the real name behind the original 50 Cent, had been dead for years by then, his reputation still commanded respect throughout Brooklyn and beyond. For someone looking to build their own fearsome reputation, this was marketing gold. "I took the name 50 Cent because it says everything I want it to say," Curtis would later explain. "I'm the same kind of person 50 Cent was. I provide for myself by any means." This wasn't just about borrowing someone else's identity. It was about tapping into a pre-existing mythology, claiming kinship with a street legend whose name still made hardened criminals pause. The decision to adopt the name came at a pivotal moment in Curtis's life. He was transitioning from street hustler to aspiring rapper, looking for a way to bridge these worlds. He needed authenticity that would resonate in both realms. In the name 50 Cent, he found a perfect symbol, something that connected him to the streets while giving him a memorable identity for his music career. What's remarkable is that Curtis made this choice without knowing the full story of Kelvin Martin. He knew the outline, a fearsome Brooklyn robber who preyed on drug dealers, but not the details of Martin's life and death. As Curtis began his rap career under this borrowed identity, he would gradually learn more about the man whose name he had taken, discovering both unsettling similarities and crucial differences between their lives. The name 50 Cent wasn't just a random choice. It was a calculated decision that would shape Curtis Jackson's entire career and public persona. But to understand the full weight of this choice, we need to know who Kelvin Martin truly was, and why his legend survived long enough for a Queens hustler to resurrect it. In the shadow of Brooklyn's Fort Greene housing projects during the 1980s, a small man cast an impossibly large shadow. Kelvin Martin stood just 5'2" and weighed barely 120 pounds. But his name, 50 Cent, became one of the most feared in New York City. This wasn't a stage name or a marketing gimmick. It was a testament to his ruthless efficiency and cold-blooded approach to robbery. According to street legends, Martin would rob anyone anywhere for any amount, even just 50 cents. No amount was too small, no target too dangerous, no location too public. Born in 1964, Martin grew up in the Fort Greene projects when Brooklyn was a war zone of territorial gangs, crack dealers, and desperate poverty. What he lacked in size, he made up for in savage determination and tactical intelligence. Unlike many criminals who specialized in one territory or type of crime, Martin became known as a stick-up kid, someone who robbed other criminals. Drug dealers, gamblers, pimps, anyone with cash was a potential target. And in a perverse ecosystem where predators preyed on predators, Martin climbed to the top of the food chain. He wasn't just another thug, said one former Brooklyn detective who investigated Martin's crimes. He was calculating. He studied his targets. He knew their routines, their weaknesses, and he struck with precision. Witnesses and victims described a man who moved with unnerving confidence, often wearing a bulletproof vest and carrying 2 guns. His small stature became part of his mystique. How could someone so physically unimposing dominate some of New York's most dangerous neighborhoods? By the mid-1980s, Martin's reputation had grown to mythic proportions. He wasn't just robbing small-time hustlers. He was targeting established drug dealers, criminal kingpins, and even celebrities. There are persistent rumors that he robbed several famous rappers, including LL Cool J, though these claims remain unconfirmed and have been denied by some of the alleged victims. What's certain is that Martin operated with impunity in areas where most criminals feared to tread, taking from those who couldn't report their losses to police. Martin's method was direct and terrifying. He would appear suddenly, guns drawn, and demand everything of value. Those who hesitated or resisted often paid with their lives. "He'd shoot you for looking at him wrong," recalled one Fort Greene resident, "not to wound you, to kill you." This willingness to use lethal force, combined with his unpredictable targeting, made him uniquely feared. Drug dealers who commanded small armies of gunmen would reportedly flee at the rumor of Martin's approach. What made Martin especially dangerous was his intelligence. Unlike the stereotype of the uneducated thug, Martin was known to be a reader, articulate and observant. He didn't just randomly attack, he studied the criminal ecosystem and identified its most vulnerable points. Former associates described him as having an almost photographic memory for faces, locations, and routines. He could watch a dice game once and tell you exactly who was carrying what, who was winning, and the best time to hit them, said one contemporary from Fort Greene. As his notoriety grew, so did the number of his enemies. By the late 1980s, Martin had robbed so many dangerous people that his continued survival seemed to defy probability. With a growing list of vengeful victims looking for him, Martin made a surprising choice. He joined the U.S. Army. Whether this was a genuine attempt to escape his criminal past or simply a strategic retreat remains debated. But his military career was short-lived. The structure and discipline of military life proved incompatible with Martin's independent, predatory nature. Upon his return to Brooklyn, Martin found the criminal landscape had changed. New players had emerged. Old alliances had shifted, and the crack epidemic had created both new opportunities and new dangers. Yet despite these changes, Martin's reputation remained intact. The name 50 Cent still carried enough weight that people stepped aside when they heard he was back in Fort Greene, but the clock was ticking on his violent career, and the enemies he had accumulated over years of robbery and murder were closing in. The bullet that ended Kelvin Martin's life in October 1987 should have also ended his legacy. Shot multiple times in the chest and left to die in a Brooklyn hallway, the original 50 Cent was killed at just 23 years old, another statistic in New York's epidemic of violence. No major newspapers carried his obituary, no record labels mourned his passing. He died as he had lived, violently and anonymously, known only to those who inhabited the same dangerous world he had terrorized. Yet somehow, Martin's ghost refused to fade. His name continued to circulate through Brooklyn's projects and Queens street corners years after his death. The legend of the fearsome stick-up kid who would rob anyone for anything became part of New York's criminal folklore. And it was this enduring mythology that eventually reached the ears of a young Curtis Jackson, giving him the perfect foundation for his emerging rap persona. What intrigued me about Kelvin's story wasn't just what he did, but how he was remembered, Curtis later reflected in a rare, candid interview. Here's a guy who'd been dead for years, but when old heads spoke his name, you could still see the respect in their eyes. That's power beyond the grave. For Curtis, who had already survived 9 gunshot wounds in a 2000 assassination attempt, the connection felt almost supernatural. 2 men who refused to die when they were supposed to. As Curtis began building his music career, he didn't just adopt Martin's name. He studied his life, absorbed what elements worked for his image, and discarded those that didn't. "I wasn't trying to be him exactly," Curtis explained. "I was taking his energy, his fearlessness, and mixing it with my own story." This selective inheritance was brilliant marketing strategy. It gave Curtis instant street credibility while allowing him the freedom to shape his own narrative. The parallels between the two men were striking. Both grew up without fathers in New York's most dangerous neighborhoods. Both turned to crime at an early age. Both were physically unimposing but developed reputations that far exceeded their physical presence. Both survived in environments where survival itself was an achievement, and both understood the power of fear as currency in a world where traditional wealth was inaccessible. But Curtis was determined to avoid Martin's fate. While embracing the original 50 Cent's reputation for ruthlessness and survival, Curtis channeled these qualities into his music and business ventures rather than continued criminal activity. His 2003 debut album title, Get Rich or Die Tryin', perfectly encapsulated this philosophy. It honored Martin's desperate hustle while signaling Curtis's intention to escape the cycle that had claimed his namesake's life. In his breakthrough, Single Many Men, Curtis raps about surviving the assassination attempt that left him with 9 bullet wounds. Many men wish death upon me, but I'm not ready to die. The song serves as both personal testament and spiritual connection to Martin, acknowledging the violent world they shared while declaring Curtis's determination to transcend it. This duality became the cornerstone of 50 Cent's appeal. Authentic, enough for the streets, ambitious enough for mainstream success. Perhaps the most powerful connection between the two 50 Cents came years later, when Curtis reportedly met with Martin's daughter. Though details of this meeting remain private, Curtis has acknowledged feeling a responsibility to honor Martin's legacy while transforming it into something positive. She smiles when she hears 50 Cent now, Curtis once said. That name means something different today than it did back then. This transformation from criminal alias to global brand represents something profound about American reinvention. Curtis didn't erase Martin's legacy, he transmuted it. The name that once signified a Brooklyn predator now adorns vodka bottles, headphones, and television credits. It appears on philanthropic initiatives and business deals worth millions. Curtis didn't just borrow Martin's name, he gave it a second life, a redemption story that the original 50 Cent never had the chance to write for himself. The relationship between these two men, one dead before the other became famous, raises fascinating questions about identity, legacy, and cultural appropriation. Did Curtis exploit a dead criminal's reputation for his own gain? Or did he honor Martin by ensuring his name would live on, albeit in transformed form? The answer likely contains elements of both, reflecting the complex moral bargains that often underlie American success stories, especially those born in the crucible of poverty and violence. Two men, one name, separated by time, but united by circumstance. Kelvin Martin died at 23 in a Brooklyn hallway, his blood staining concrete. His legacy confined to whispered stories in New York's roughest neighborhoods. Curtis Jackson survived 9 bullets at 25, transforming a near-death experience into the foundation of an empire worth hundreds of millions. These divergent fates reveal something profound about choices, chances, and the razor-thin line between tragedy and triumph in America's unforgiving streets. Martin's legacy was written in blood, a testament to the brutal economics of 1980s Brooklyn, where violence was often the only currency available to young black men trapped in systemic poverty. His intelligence and tactical brilliance might have made him a corporate strategist in another life. Instead, these attributes were channeled into a criminal career that ended predictably and tragically. The streets don't love nobody, as Curtis would later rap, a lesson Martin learned too late. Curtis's genius wasn't just surviving his own assassination attempt, but recognizing that Martin's name carried power that could be harnessed and redirected. When he adopted the 50 Cent moniker, Curtis wasn't finding a catchy stage name. He was performing cultural alchemy, transmuting street infamy into commercial gold. This transformation raises uncomfortable questions about who gets to reinvent themselves in America. Can a name soaked in violence be cleansed through success? Does Martin's family deserve a share of the fortune built using his identity? I think about him sometimes, Curtis once admitted in a rare reflective moment. Not every day, but when things get crazy, when I'm on some red carpet or in some boardroom with executives who have no idea where that name really comes from. There's something almost funny about it. This dude who terrified Brooklyn is now selling vodka to suburban kids who think 50 cent just means half a dollar. The musical legacy Curtis created under the borrowed name has deeply influenced American culture. Songs like Many Men speak directly to the struggle Martin embodied, the desperate drive to survive by any means necessary. The raw authenticity in Curtis's early work came partly from his genuine connection to street life, but also from the borrowed gravitas of Martin's legend. When Curtis rapped about survival and betrayal, he wasn't just telling his own story. He was channeling the ghost of Fort Greene's most feared predator. For a generation of fans, 50 Cent represents resilience and entrepreneurial success. They wear his merchandise, drink his champagne, watch his TV shows, and quote his lyrics without knowing they're participating in perhaps the most successful rebranding exercise in hip-hop history. The violent origins of the name have been sanitized and packaged for mass consumption, a process that mirrors America's broader tendency to commodify black struggle for entertainment. What makes this story remarkable is how it illuminates the thin line between criminal and entrepreneur. The same qualities that made Martin feared, strategic thinking, risk tolerance, understanding of human psychology, made Curtis successful in legitimate business. The difference wasn't just in their choices, but in their timing and luck. Curtis survived his shooting, Martin didn't. Curtis found music as an outlet. Martin never discovered a similar escape route. In 2020, Curtis reflected, "Success is about making decisions that change your life." I took that name because I understood what it represented. Survival against all odds. The original 50 Cent survived until he didn't. I've survived and thrived. Same starting point, different ending. This tale ultimately reveals a harsh truth about American mythology. For every success story of transformation, countless others end in tragedy. Curtis Jackson's brilliant reinvention represents the exception, not the rule. For every Curtis who escapes the streets to find fame, thousands of Kelvins meet violent ends, their potential forever unrealized, their names remembered only in neighborhood folklore, if at all. When fans stream In Da Club or watch Power, few think about the deadly stick-up kid from Fort Greene whose reputation helped launch an entertainment empire. But Martin's ghost remains embedded in every product bearing. The 50 Cent name, an invisible co-author of hip-hop's most remarkable success story. One forgotten, one immortalized, both products of the same unforgiving streets, both testament to the power of reputation. The next time you hear that name, whether on a song, a vodka bottle, or a television credit, remember that it carries the weight of two lives, one that ended in obscurity and another that transformed tragedy into triumph. In the space between these opposing fates lies a uniquely American story about reinvention, second chances, and the complex alchemy that transforms street legends into global icons.